Theme park workers of Reddit, what are your horror stories? Worked at a Six Flags as a sound technician, so I spent most of my time backstage with the characters and actors. One time I walked backstage to find a headless Bugs Bunny and Scooby-Doo having sex. Costumes just unzipped, not off. Not exactly a horror story but definitely scarring. I once worked at a water park as a lifeguard supervisor and it was an everyday thing that someone crap or threw up in the pools. We even called it a code brown so we weren't straight up saying yeah, another turd in the kiddie pool. Another time we had a riptide water ride where people could ride bodyboards like a big wave, and while I was talking to another guard I heard the whistle go off like there was an emergency. As I approached, a guard told me that there was a nail in someone's foot. I thought he meant someone stubbed their toe and their nail pushed back into their toe, but it was an 8-year-old girl who had stepped on a 4-inch screw left over from the maintenance the ride had recently undergone, right into the heel. As I saw it I got a little lightheaded, but that's what I was trained to do, so as I picked her up and pulled her out of the water she moved her foot and it started to come out, but it was still in there a good 3 inches. I put a latex glove on it and told her it'd be okay as I called for paramedics. Her dang brothers came up and said that she was gonna ruin their time if they had to leave and I had to tell them to get away. When the paramedics came they picked her up to put her on the stretcher, and when they did, that good old latex glove slid off her foot and got hooked on the screw in the foot, causing her, what I believed by her screams, excruciating pain. Never found out what happened after that, but she should have sued. Big payday. I just got an image of a lifeguard screaming down a walkie-talkie, code brown. We got a code brown. We need backup down here quick. Operated rides for 4 years. 2 moments stand out. The scariest moment I had was when lightning struck a utility pole below me. My position on the ride was about 50 feet up, knocking out power to my ride and forcing me and my supervisors to unload the ride in the middle of a lightning storm. The second was a guy who was very upset that I wouldn't let his kid, who was a foot under the height requirement, ride. I told him no early in the day, but one of my co-workers let the kid ride while I was on break. The family comes up later and the father, who was noticeably drunk, jumps 2 gates and over the tracks to threaten me with a knife. I called security and he ran. I used to work at a small water park where there were some dry rides up the southern end. There was this 8-year-old kid just being a little crap, pushing in line, climbing up the slide of the playground, knocking other kids' hats off, that sort of balls. I warn him several times then ask him to leave, but he doesn't. I go and ask my supervisor what to do and he says get the scissors. He means to cut his wristband, without which he can't go on any rides. I call him over, and he surprisingly complies, and before he can react, I grab his wrist and cut off his wristband. Naturally, he starts crying like a bee. He runs off to get his mum and she comes back about 15 minutes later and comes and talks to me, without her son. She asks why I did what I did, and I explain the situation to her, and how it is standard procedure. She nods and understands, and knows that her son is a demon child. She leaves, but, lo and behold, 10 minutes later here he comes. He tries to cut in line again and I stop him, and ask him to go back to his mum. His first reaction was to punch me in the balls. Oh crap. No he didn't. My supervisor sees and immediately calls security. Apparently his mum saw too and she comes running. She doesn't say anything to her child, but goes and tells the supervisor to scare him. When security arrives, 30 seconds later, they grab the kid, whirl him around and handcuff him. He's crapping himself at this point. They grab him and take him off in their golf cart. A few minutes later they return and the kid has obviously been crying, and hard. He jumps out of the cart and runs straight to his mum, who grabs him and walks out. People watching were stunned, but amazingly, and I crap you not, some applauded as they went off. Best day of work I had at that place. I am simultaneously astounded and very happy that the mother let the kid get what was coming to him. We take care to make sure everything is as safe as can possibly be, so I haven't had many horror stories in my time working at a theme park. The only thing that comes to my mind is all the times parents BS you when you tell them their child isn't tall enough to ride, or when someone makes a scene when you have to politely tell them they are too large to ride and must get off the ride because they don't fit. I've seen people totally lose their crap because their child missed the mark by at least a good 6 inches. Seriously, If their kid gets hurt, they aren't gonna blame themselves for being so ignorant. The worst thing that's happened is a guy spitting in my face and starting to film me with his phone while screaming at me that he was going to sue the company I work for because I confronted him when he tried to trip one of my performers during a Halloween event. He was drunk. He was arrested. We all laughed at his mugshot the next day. I don't know if these count as horror stories as there's no injury or gore involved, but here's a couple things that happened to me while interfacing with the theme park going public. I was managing a few ride photo booths and I was in one of them talking to an employee when a guy looked at our prices, picked out the package of 4 photos for $20, and said $20 for one photo? That's unfair to families. I told him that the price was $20 for 4, and if he'd like a single photo, it was $10. He got very close to my face and growled, "Are you getting smart with me?" I told him no, tried to walk him through the different prices, and he kept saying, "Are you getting smart with me?" Finally I just walked away round to the back of the booth to check on some stock, during which point he told my employee that if he saw me again, I was getting punched in the face. Worked at Kings Island on a ride called Diamondback. One day the train came back and this kid, 10 or 12 years old, was completely unconscious. He was slumped over in his seat being held up by his mother. For those of you who don't know, the seats on Diamondback are lap bars, so this kid was literally like folded in half slumped over. Also, the ride is smooth as silk, so he didn't hit his head or anything. Anyway, we immediately call 911 inside the park. Any park telephones route to the park's first aid station when you call 911. Meanwhile, all we can legally do as I had to stand there completely helpless watching his parents try to wake him up. They said he passed out while going up the first hill, 230 feet, and they had to hold him up to keep from flopping around throughout the entire ride. When the first aid cart got there, they lifted him off the seat and onto a stretcher and wheeled him off the ride, and he regained consciousness near the entrance of the ride. My area supervisor asked us all if we were okay to keep working and said if we needed to we can all go home. It was terrifying. I thought the kid was dead and the moment I saw him slumped in his seat is still etched in my mind. That memory isn't the worst part though. Standing there, legally unable to do anything even if I knew how, while the mother was crying, just trying to get a response while the father tried to keep it together for the boy's sister, is the most haunting memory I have and I think it will be for a while. I worked as a lifeguard for a while at a water park. The wooden building behind the wave pool caught on fire one day, probably because of an employee smoking in there. The park had to be evacuated and people were passing out in the parking lot left and right since it was about 100 degrees outside. The building burned down, along with all of the ride tubes that were stored in there. It was one of the worst days I've ever had to work. I just imagine people running and screaming in the parking lot, literally dropping left and right, while in the background, miles and miles of amusement park is just burning to the ground. I worked for the Halloween events for a theme park in my area, won't say the name, but it might be on the border between 2 states. I got kicked in the face and almost broke my nose. I was given a break for as long as it took for my nose to stop bleeding, and that counted as my only break for the evening. We got under 30 minutes of break time for a 8-hour shift. Another guy actually got fired because he had a migraine and had to go to the first aid area until it was over. It took something like 2 hours, and they fired him for it. We were also the maze closest to the only place that served alcohol in the park, so we had to deal with drunk buttholes and crappy kids fairly often. Someone choked a girl working in the maze. The maze almost burned down a few times because buttholes decided that a dried corn maze was a good place to smoke a fricking cigarette. I had a lot of fun most of the time, but I had to deal with a bunch of stupid crap on a nightly basis. Well, I worked at Busch Gardens Williamsburg and I have 2 stories. First story, WTF. I was working as a ride operator on the Big Bad Wolf, now torn down. It was a slow day for us, so my area manager had me move from my current position to help out the area staff, cleans the park, in a busier part. I didn't mind because most of the time you just walk around and take in the sights. I also like to keep it clean and the park is usually pretty dang clean. I then got a radio call to come to the men's bathroom at the German Fest house. Now usually this would mean there is an overflow in the trash or some toilet paper on the ground from inconsiderate nesters. You know who you are. Well, I walked in and instantly realized something was wrong. The smell. Oh my god, the smell. It was so thick I could taste it. I walked past the open stalls and still nothing could be seen, but the smell got stronger. The last stall was in sight and it was the handicap stall. I went to the door and opened it. Inside was what looked like a caveman painting of horses and arrows but drawn in human faces. It was everywhere, literally everywhere. I immediately went to a couple of stalls over and threw up. I then radioed in that the men's bathroom was a big nope from me and put an out of order sign on it. Not touching that little crap Picasso that was going on in there. Story 2. Sad. This is a sad story and one that has managed to stick with me for a long time. I was on break. The park was hot, like 94 degrees out, with the humidity squeezing my neck. The park was packed with walking room, no better than rush hour traffic. My friend was a park medic who only has been working for about 4 months. Let's call her Shelly. Well, we were talking and an alarm came in over the radio stating a guest has passed out next to her child. She immediately left our conversation and took off running. The next time I saw her I was clocking out and she was walking to her crying. I asked her what was wrong and she let the waterworks go. Shelly looked up and told me what really happened. An old lady came to the park with her granddaughter. The grandmother was waiting on a bench while her daughter played in a splash zone. The grandmother collapses and the daughter runs over just as the woman starts bleeding from her eyes, nose, mouth, and fingernails. Shelly is there moments later as a manager was by her side in panic. Shelly immediately starts trying to check her vitals as the girl grabs her arm and begs her not to let her grandma die. The grandmother died shortly after. Shelly quit that day. I have experienced a couple of incidents, mostly just people trying to attack me if they don't get their will, but the most horrible thing I've encountered is also the best thing I encountered. I was working in Legoland in Denmark and I was at a ride that was just a train. We would be 2 on shift and I was standing at the line waiting for my partner to come back with the train. While I stood there and waited, a guest from the line called me over and said that there was a boy who wasn't 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 boy. After there went some seconds I decided I couldn't wait for them and started to give him mouth to mouth. I had the kid out a solid minute and was starting to crap myself when he slowly started to wake up and breath again. Both me and the father just sank down in relief that the boy survived. Then the emergency crew came and got the father and boy to a hospital. The next week they came again and I was thanked by the boy's whole family and they said they were extremely grateful for what I've done. They tried to offer me all kind of stuff but I refused and said I was happy with just the boy being alive. Thank you for sharing this. Worked at a Paramount Park several years back as a lifeguard. The grossest part is that the giant wave pool is not drained refilled all summer. By the end of the summer, when the wave pool was turned off at the end of the night, you could see sunscreen oil slicks on the surface and all of the band-aids and hair ties would settle into a giant disgusting mass. A few times I saw guards going after money, but I can assure you it wasn't worth it. After the water park closed, I filled in on rides duty. One time I filled in as a height checker because the girl who did it before me had her arm broken by a psycho dad who tried to take her wristbands, which were used to indicate kids' height, from her for his kid who was too short to ride safely. My first job out of high school was at a theme park. Nothing crazy, just a lot of poop. Kids would poop on rides, adults would poop on rides. It was a daily poop fest. At the time I was under 18 so it was always awesome when it happened because I had to shut the ride down and call in for cleanup instead of doing it myself. Diarrhea on a roller coaster is not fun for anyone on the ride. Never had a lot of horror stories, as a lot was quite safe. But before I worked there, a woman went on stealth, very fast and very high, and it hit a bird mid-flight, and part of its beak went into her arm. But apart from that, the constant sick. One time I saw a pigeon get obliterated by someone's face on one of those pendulum rides that spin and swing. It landed just in front of me, in the queue. and its claw grabbed the air in its last motion as a trickle of blood ran off the edge of the ride and into the water underneath. The worst part was when its little pigeon lover was looking out sadly from their nest, which they decided to make in the triangular legs of the ride. Worked at a theme park for 7 years. Past few have been in the water park area. We have a slide that is about 100 feet tall and rockets single riders straight down and into a lengthy trough at the bottom. Last summer we had an issue where the water levels were incorrect. For a few weeks it was too low, and guests were complaining about their backs getting scratched, so the plumbers raised the water level. However, being that this slide rockets you at an ungodly speed, this created a B-day effect on people who rode the slide. One woman came down and just laid in the trough, waving one of the lifeguards down. When they reached her, she was screaming that a massive what? We were walking around the amusement park, wasn't open, in Mosul, Iraq, looking for a mortar team that was reported to be in the area, and a sniper took a couple of shots at us. Does that count? I've been to the Baghdad Children's Park. We just kind of parked in the shade for a while. Not quite as exciting as many on this thread, but my dad worked the log flume at Six Flags as a teenager, and his boss refused to give him a water break even though it was ridiculously hot. He ended up fainting face-first onto the metal lap bar while checking it and knocked most of his front teeth out. Ended up suing Six Flags and got full dental reconstruction, and they paid for his college. Well, there was the one time a kid was decapitated after trying to get a hat that fell off during a roller coaster. I imagine that is pretty scarring. Or the veteran who lost his legs in Iraq getting on a roller coaster at Darien Lake and flying out of it. Back when I worked at a relatively large East Coast theme park, we had what many called the craziest shutdown anyone had seen or heard about. The ride I was working was a dark ride, a motion simulator that followed a track and had 3D projection screens. I was closing in the control room that night where we would dispatch ride vehicles, RVs, and monitor ride cameras and the ride control screen. Over the headset, I hear that an intoxicated male couple was coming up to ride. Okay, fair enough. As they were getting on, they were acting slightly belligerent, so was informed to watch them through the ride by the loader. In scene 1, the ride has 11 scenes. They begin to make out. Fair enough. It happens all the time. I was narrating it over the headset since it was a slow night and we were all shooting the crap. In scene 3 I see their hand moving due south, and next thing I know they're standing up in the RV. At this point I depress the emergency stop and all the ride work lights come up with all the RVs stopping in place. I then call the ride down explaining the e-stop is due to a drunk couple standing up. Here's where it gets interesting. They decided to slip their way out of the lap bars and begin climbing out of the RV. I get on the ride mic telling them to please return to your sleigh. They're also called sleighs. Little did I know I selected all. Call on the touchscreen for the ride mic, and people down at the ride entrance and passers-by were randomly hearing me yelling, please return to your sleigh. I scan the monitor attempting to find them in the ride area and cannot for the life of me find them. At this point the entrance host calls controls to ask what the heck is going on. I explain and he busts out laughing. I hear my supervisor's keys jingling as she's running up the exit platform as she's laughing from the call over the radio about a drunk male's couple standing up and climbing out. Once she arrives, we do a ride evac so we can reset from the e-stop and to walk the track to find the culprits. After about 30 minutes, we can't find them and give up and start cycling the ride again before going back up. We checked the control screen to see if there had been any ride doors recently opened, and none had since that morning when maintenance was clearing the ride for operation. At close we all had to fill out witness statements for security and we all had a good laugh. Next morning, maintenance tells us they found 2 condom wrappers in scene 3, the scene they escaped in. To this day, we have no idea where the heck they ended up. Not me, but my friend used to work at Disney in Florida. He was standing at the entrance for the line and had to tell a family that their child was too short to ride the ride. They could switch off and ride the ride if they wanted, but one of them would have to stay with the child. They say okay and walk away. Well, the child was young enough to be wearing one of those leashes that you can put on your kid, and maybe 20 minutes later, he saw the kid a little ways away, by himself. tied up to a light pole. So my friend, we'll call him Rob, resolves to wait a minute before calling it in. It may be there in the bathroom, not that it makes it okay. Anywho, 15 minutes later the kid's still tied up and he calls security. It takes security maybe another 10 to 15 minutes to get there, so the kid has been tied up for at least the better part of an hour now. They come and see the kid and say, "Hey, wanna come with us? We're gonna take you somewhere fun," and the kid is excited and goes with them. Rob's shift doesn't end for another 3 hours, and he doesn't see the family come back. Well, the next guy who comes and replaces Rob sees them come back later and freak out. By the time the parents got back and found a manager and found out what happened, their child was already with social services. They were from out of state. They had to go back without their child and return at a later date for a court hearing. I work in retail at Adventureland in Des Moines, Iowa. If any of you are familiar with the place, I'm loaded with whack stories. We have these slushy fountains in certain stores, and I happened to be working in the water park area one day when this chubby little kid comes in, shirtless. He goes up to the slushy machine and takes a straw and unwraps the paper off it. He proceeds to scratch his stomach using said straw and then he puts it back in with the rest of the straws. Then he just leaves. It was actually pretty gross. We also have a strict no smoking policy, though drinking is allowed. One day this group of obviously drunk guys walks into my store. One of them has a pretty good sized bloody cut on his leg. He tells me he walked into a wall and hurt himself, which was obviously bulls. I go ahead and call first aid, because it looks pretty bad. While waiting for first aid, he starts smoking a cigarette. I inform him that I couldn't let him do that, because it's against the law in Iowa. Then he just puts his hand behind his back, because, apparently, if I can't see his cigarette, he isn't smoking one. I'm pretty sure he and his friends got escorted out. I operated rides in management for 4 years. Some girl riding in the front seat of a major roller coaster struck and killed a bird. Upon re-entering the station, her chest and face were covered in feathers and bird goo. Some guy with a cup full of drink, upon being asked to discard the drink, dumped its entire contents into our loose article bin, containing phones, hats, etc. And literally no more than 15 seconds later the loose article bin guy arrived to collect the items inside. The guy comes maybe once every other week, so it was absolutely ridiculous that he came the moment that all the stuff inside was now covered in sticky soda. Some lady and her son were hanging out near a coaster I was operating, and the lady was housing a bird in her cleavage and feeding it pre-chewed foods. Her son began doing the same, feeding it while it was still in her chest. When I called security, twice, because it was a health concern, they finally sent one guy who saw it and immediately picked up the phone to inform base that it wasn't a prank. They thought I was completely making it up. When they sent more security, she strapped her 8-year-old kid into a stroller, stuffed her bird in her bra, and booked it. On Independence Day weekend a few years ago, one of my employees literally took a crap on the ride he was working on, which is absurd because the ride is quite open and there are no spots he could have been where he was completely out of sight of at least some guests. When I finally got there I had to clean it up. In another bird killing incident, our drop tower shot up in launch mode and struck a bird flying by, plunging approximately 200 feet to its earthly demise. It was kind of surreal because we didn't really know what happened until we saw it come to a stop on the ground. I only heard this one through my friend who worked in the water park. Some guy was getting off a water slide and lost a contact, and he demanded that they shut the ride off so he could look for it. When security told him to get lost, he refused to move from the water slide and they called the police to escort him out. When they showed up, he sprinted off and they eventually had to restrain him for disturbing our operations and generally being a huge butt about everything. I can't even find my contact when I drop it on my bathroom countertop. That guy's insane. Some guests are just obnoxious. I saw a family of a mom, dad, brother, and sister. The boy was about 9 or so. The mother was furiously yelling at him because he didn't want to ride the roller coaster. It went something along the lines of, "Are you gonna do it or not? Stop being a fricking pee or we'll just fricking go home." I was pee for the rest of the day. Sounds a lot like my mum. Needless to say, I'm moving far away the first chance I get. I had a friend who worked at Great America for years. His most gruesome story was about the day he pee off the boss and got assigned to clean the ball pit. Just the sheer tonnage of crap. Never again. Not a horror story or anything. I worked at the biggest theme park in Toronto. I was a ride operator in the dead of summer. We would switch between 2 or 3 rides in our area. I operated a roller coaster and swings. The booth we sat in for the coaster was air conditioned. I loved being at that ride. But the swings had a booth about the size of a porta potty. One window. The window was stuck and it was about 35 Celsius without the humidex. I ended up fainting after I was in there for about 20 minutes. As I passed out, I whacked my head on the control panel, giving me a concussion. After that event they started bringing huge jugs of water to each ride if it got over 30 C. I worked on an amusement park near my city for a month one summer. There was this one ride that was pretty much just a bunch of fake airplanes that slowly rose up and turned in a circle slowly. Anyone could go on it, babies, pregnant ladies, etc. The only restraints were seatbelts. Each plane could hold about 250 pounds. One day I finished checking all the seatbelts and proceed to click the start button and the ride starts up. Now, from my operating booth there was one airplane I couldn't see. In the time I took to walk to my booth and start the ride, some kid, around 6 or 7, decides it would be fun to undo his seatbelt. But he doesn't stop there. The kid decides to climb out of the plane and by the time I see him the plane has risen about 10 feet in the air and the ride has begun to spin. He didn't decide just to crawl onto the ground though. He was standing on the dang wing of the fake airplane. I freak out because this kid looks like he's gonna fall, and I slam on my emergency stop button. Usually an emergency stop button brings the ride back down to the ground, but this time it just stopped spinning and the planes just hung in midair frozen as this kid stood on the wing. I had to call maintenance to lower the planes and I seriously thought the kid was going to fall. His parents said nothing to him and got mad at me for not keeping him in his seat. TLDR. Some kid climbs out of the ride to stand on the wing of the fake plane as it rises into the air and I get yelled at by his parents. Another story, same summer, I was working on a really lame ride, nothing much was happening, and boom, I felt it, my period was there. I needed a washroom break but I couldn't leave my ride unattended. I used the phone in my booth to call for a washroom break. I said it was an emergency. 1 hour passes, I'm in heck. I call again. They say they'll send someone. By the time someone comes I have bled through my pants and the blood is dripping down my legs. I was about an hour drive from home and had taken the bus to get there. I had to sloppily clean up and live in my disgusting pants the rest of the day. Not getting needed breaks was a common thing. It was awful. TLDR. Need more freaking breaks so you don't bleed everywhere. I was visiting Cedar Point in Sandusky, Ohio and was stopped right at the gate of the Chaos ride since all of the cars were full. Little did I know this would secure front row seats for the best story of the entire trip. A man who had gotten on the ride just before me had placed his video camera on the operator's booth so he wouldn't have to take it with him on the ride and risk breaking losing it. As the ride is starting up, one of the operators notices it and gets the bright idea to start filming thinking well this will be a nice memory that the father and son won't have to put any work into preserving at all. She was wrong. Halfway through the ride the owner of the camera loses his lunch and breakfast and what looks like dinner from the night before. Seriously, this guy had a lot in there and a lot came spewing out of him. Before the operator with the camera realizes what has happened, he has stopped barfing and she quietly closes the camera and puts it away as the ride comes slowly to a stop. The man apologizes for the mess, gathers his camera and things and leaves in embarrassment. None of the operators say a word about the fact that it is on film. All I can imagine is him sitting his family down to watch the home movie of their trip to Cedar Point and him going hum. I don't remember filming this, oh god. Oh god no as his entire family sees the recorded history of his weak stomach. TLDR, man unknowingly is recorded on his own camera vomiting. I can imagine her narrating while recording. Hopefully you don't mind sir. Just thought you might enjoy this memo god. I'm so sorry. End recording. My friend worked at a major water theme park and told me he once saw a special needs guy jerk off and unload into one of those huge pools with big waves. Lots of people were in it. He said all the park did was shut down the pool for half an hour, poured a little chlorine, and opened it back up. strange, after reading about people getting injured and killed, etc. This is the one story that made me so horrified my jaw dropped open. For a spring semester I was an intern at Walt Disney World. I worked in a fast food restaurant in the Magic Kingdom. Basically you're at the happiest place on earth but serving the angriest people on earth because they're all exhausted and hungry. Anyways, one day I was working in the front of the house on a particularly stormy day, and like most people of America know, it rains almost every day in Florida in the warmer months. Well, customers like to complain when the weather is bad and ruining their vacations. I get it, I guess, but some take it to the extremes. Now on the particular day, the dining room was packed with people just trying to hide out from the rain. I got a call on my radio saying code V, which is the code for vomit. Being the intern, I got to clean it up. Luckily they have the stuff that looks like pencil shavings that just soak it up and then you just sweep it. I go to the table and this poor little girl was in a high chair and the throw up was literally all over her high chair, the table, and the floor. So I get it all cleaned up and ask the manager if I can run to the nearest gift shop and get her a new shirt. Disney is awesome like that. I come back and no joke 15 minutes later I get another code V. Same table. This time it was just on the table, but I noticed it was not primarily in front of the little girl. I don't question it and clean it again. I start talking to the mother, who was very overweight and quite older, and then came to the realization that it was the mother both times who had thrown up, not the daughter, and that she didn't know it was coming the first time, and that second time she felt it, but didn't want to lose her spot at her table. So basically I learned that day that people will do anything to remain being a lazy person. I don't work in a theme park but at Carowinds, an NCSC amusement park. They have this Halloween thing called Scare-O-Winds or something like that. Employees dress up in these scary costumes and run around scaring the visitors. A big rule there is that you cannot touch them and they cannot touch you. This is the story of the time I broke that rule. So my brother and I were waiting in line for a kiddie ride of some sort when out of the blue some guy dressed in a zombie wolfman costume comes up and scares us. In fear I screamed and punched the guy in the face as hard as I could. He screams in pain because I had just broken his nose. Security gets called. They take my picture while the police and amusement park security talk to my dad and the injured employee. I can't much remember what happened afterwards other than telling the police officer what I did and having to say sorry to the employee. As of 2006 I am not allowed back at Scare-Winds until 2016. Yep. This is what happens when you scare a 9-year-old girl. You end up with a broken nose and a hurt ego. By the way, I can go to Carowinds but my dad won't let me or my siblings go since the incident. Dang, for a 9-year-old girl you packed a wallop. Got a good one here. So back in high school I worked as a lifeguard for a small water park on the East Coast. The job sucked, the pay was horrible, and the management was a real B, so after the first month of working their motivation really plummeted. Well, in order to have insurance, the company that insured the water park hired individuals who would come to the pool as normal patrons with hidden cameras and pretend to drown in order to see how fast a competent one of the lifeguards would rescue them. Additionally, they had this life-size child mannequin that would sink to the bottom and they would carefully put it in the water to see if any of the lifeguards would spot and rescue it in time. Now this thing looked like a real kid and was complete with swim trunks and goggles, so underwater it was close to impossible to differentiate it from a real child. The first time the insurance company did this, the lifeguard on duty failed miserably to spot the dummy within time, so the whole park got audited and everyone had to go through retraining, but the company let us keep the child dummy for training and practice. Now for the good part. The park was still open to the public while we were going through our retraining, and everyone got to take turns carefully placing the dummy into the water and testing each other on how fast they could find it. When it got to my turn for placing the dummy into the water, everyone had pretty much exhausted every way to put this thing into the pool, so I decided that I would one up everyone and do something nobody thought of. There was a water slide that pretty much went around the park, and I came up with the idea that about halfway down I would throw the dummy over the side of the slide and have it land in the lazy river where nobody watches. Sounds like a great idea, right? Well, about halfway down I grab this thing and throw it off of the slide and completely miss where it was supposed to land. Instead of landing in the pool, this dummy goes head first into pavement right in front of where all the chairs and families are relaxing. People were screaming. Kids were crying. Lifeguards were freaking out. Everyone thought they had just seen a kid fall about 40 feet onto concrete and had his face completely smashed in. After numerous complaints and threats of lawsuits caused by the emotional trauma the guests had endured, I was fired that afternoon. The dummy itself was too damaged to be used anymore. I was in Cedar Point when this mom begged her son, about 9 or 10, to go on the Millennium Force with her. He was nervous and did not want to ride, but was also nervous about waiting without her. So he agreed and sat down. When the ride starts, it kicks you out really fast and I could hear him screaming. I lost it here, and when his train came back he had Einstein hair and the look of what the heck mom on his face, along with tears of happiness that it was over. I couldn't stop laughing. Poor kid. I hope that didn't ruin roller coasters for him. Probably buried, but I used to work as a lifeguard at a small water park. The park was so small that during the week, some of our only customers in the first half of the day were day camps. About once every month we would get a special needs day camp. Why they thought it would be a good idea to take special needs kids to a water park, I don't know. Well, I'm at the top of our biggest slide, a platform that's about 40-60 feet tall with 2 slides, an open and completely enclosed slide. Anyway, we get this kid come up with one of the counselors. It's clear the kid can't really communicate. However, he appears to be scared to go down. Since the counselors are familiar with the park, they want him to go down the open to the element slide, as it is much slower and less intense than the enclosed one. The kid is obviously reluctant to go down, so he steps out of line for a bit. Finally, he braves enough courage to go down. However, the first few feet down the slide he gets stuck. He was kind of a bigger kid with a poor suit and the slide hadn't been waxed in a while. Normally when this happens, people just push off the wall once and are good the rest of the way down. Being special needs and all, his first instinct is to stand up. Here I am panicking, seeing a special needs kid standing up 40-60 feet in the air on a slippery surface. Luckily the counselor immediately reacted and went down the slide, grabbed the kid, and together they slid down to safety. However, the slide is poorly designed to the point that I can't really see people at the bottom. I'm trained to send people down when I see the person walking on the sidewalk. It's sorta complicated. Anyway, me in my stressed out state, I see the counselor walking around, so I assume it's safe to send down the next rider. However, the counselor never thought to turn around and grab the special needs from the bottom of the slide. Before I noticed this, it was too late. And to make matters worse, the person I sent down was a 300-pound semi-truck who was hauling down the slide. Seriously, not exaggerating. This semi-truck of a lady literally plows through the special needs kid at the bottom. Luckily the kid was alright, but that was the worst day of my first year at the park. Dude, putting the TLDR at the beginning is cheating. I have to read the story now. I've posted this before, but here goes. Oh man, I love this story, but it's a long one. I worked as a ride operator. One of your rides was a water ride. You get into a big boat, it goes up a big hill, comes down the hill into deep water, splashes everywhere. One day working the ride, I'm talking to my buddy who worked with me. I think a new Skyrim preview video got released the night before, and we hear there's someone in the water, so I tell my buddy, you stop the ride, I'll go check it out. Now the water isn't deep, maybe 6-7 inches, but there are fences all around it, and if you're in the water, you're 30 feet from a 4-ton moving ride. So I take a walk out of our area into the exit area, and I see a kid sitting there. Maybe about 12 years old he looked. He was sitting cross-legged, so I thought he climbed the fence, jumped in, and landed on his leg and broke it. I see my friend calling on the park phone to security, and I think this is going to take too long, so I take my shoes off, put my socks in my shoes, and climb over to check on the kid. I get down and I say, it's cool dude, people are coming and we're gonna get you out of here. You okay? You cool? It was then that I noticed he was feeling around in the water. I look and he's got a handful of change in his hands. I'm like, crap, I think this kid is retarded, so I start talking again. Hey there, we're going to get you out of here real soon, okay? You think you can climb that fence yourself? Now he was a pretty big kid for his age, or what age he looked. I tried to lift him over the fence to his guardian, but as soon as I went to pick him up, he went limp, dead weight. He was not having it. So I'm talking to this kid, trying everything. How was your day? What was your favorite ride? What's your name? Didn't get a word out of him. He did like to splash though. He especially liked to splash when I asked him not to. Good times. So security finally gets there, and me and 2 other guys haul this kid out through a break in the fence there for maintenance. They sit him down and start talking to the mom. Apparently he has ADD, ADHD, OCD, and severe autism, and he hadn't taken his medication today. She swears she only took her eyes off him for a few seconds. They had to strap him to a wheelchair and wheel him out. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video.